Without this one man who was the glue that kept this group running for over 50 years, the Temptations are perhaps the greatest soul group of all time. With many variants of lineups, we saw many faces come and go, except for one. The one and only Otis Williams. Now, before we get started in today's video, please be sure to leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, and push that notification bell to stay up to date. Now without further ado, let's cue that intro. Otis Claiborne Miles Jr. was born on October 30th, 1941 in Texarkana, Texas to Otis Miles Sr. and Hazel Louise Williams. His parents would separate shortly after his birth, and his mother would remarry and move to Detroit, Michigan, where he was a baby, leaving little Otis in Texas to be raised by both of his grandmothers. Because one of his grandmothers was a strict parent, he went to church every Sunday, even during the week, and as a result, Otis would join his church choir. As a member of his church choir, Otis began listening to many gospel groups such as the Dixie Hummingbirds and the Highway QCs, among many others. As a child, Otis used to fantasize about the harmonies that was provided by these groups, which motivated him to sing.
Well, originally I'm from Texarkana, Texas, and I was raised by my grandmothers on both sides, my father and my mother. And staying with my father's mother, there was no television back during that time, and a lot of chores, and she was a disciplinarian and having to go to church sometimes, not only on Sundays, but during the week, because, church would have different kind of functions, and I was part of the choir, so and then I used to listen at the radio growing up, and back during those days, I'm from listening at the Pilgrim Travelers, the Soul Stirrers, the Dixie Hummingbirds, the Highway QCs, Swan Silvertones, and so I would just lay there and just be knocked out about all that wonderful harmony that they would be making, and being part of the choir, and so that was where I guess my desire to sing.
Now, Otis would spend a lot of time with his mother and stepfather over the summer and Christmas holidays, but it came a time when Otis needed to be with his mother permanently. So, at the age of 11, he would relocate to Detroit with his stepfather and mother. Now, during his teen years, his family would relocate to Detroit's west side, where he was introduced to names such as Mary Gordy, The Miracles, Jackie Wilson, and Marv Johnson, to mention a few. This is where he became inspired to sing the quote-unquote devil's music as it was known back then, and it was this moment he decided to form his own street singing group. By 1955, Williams was enrolled at Northwestern High School, where he attended with Melvin Franklin, Elbridge Bryan, and Richard Street. Now by this time, Otis had adopted his mother's maiden name, Williams, and he had established many groups with Street and Bryan, including the Siberians, the El Domingos, and the Distance. Now Williams, he would meet Franklin by hearing him sing, and he fell in love with his deep tone style of singing, knowing it was what his group was lacking. Now during this time, Blue, he did one song with a local group named the Voice Masters, and Otis, he knew he needed him.
I first heard Melvin Franklin's voice with the group by the name of the Voice Masters. Now, I had heard the Voice Masters when they came out with Hope and Pray. They didn't have no bass singer, and the harmony was impeccable. So then they came out, I guess, X amount of months later, with Needed for Lovers Only Part 1 and 2. And Melvin was started off, I believe, with Boom Boom, and I said, who is that? Voice Master's got a bass? Jesus, he's something else. Now, I didn't know Melvin was just 16 years old, sounding like an old man, even way back then. So I went and bought the record, and I just sat there and I was listening.
One day, Otis had approached Blue, and at this time, it was common for singers to slick their hair back, and that's how his hair was. But to Blue, the Street Boys also did this too. So he thought Otis was going to rob him, so he ran off.
I'm walking down Woodrow Wilson, and Melvin was coming down Woodrow Wilson, and for whatever reason, I said, well, I be dog. That's who I'm looking for. So back during those days, I would have the process hairdo and the leather jacket and the tight pants and the white bucks. Melvin thought I was part of a gang, you know, and so when he saw me, he crossed over the street and I crossed over. Then he would cross over. I said, hey, man, you know, so it was back and forth until he finally stopped. And I said, I want to talk to you about singing with me. He said, well, I thought you was a gang, and I thought you was a gang member, and I thought you was going to beat me up.
Now, after persuading Blue that he was just there because he wanted him to join his group, Otis had to explain the same thing to his mother. After a lot of persuading, Blue's mother would officially allow Blue to join Otis' group. Now, Otis' group, that was influenced by several bands, including Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers, the Drifters, and the Cadillacs. And like many groups at that time, they gained a lot of attention by performing on the street corners.
So, you know, we would emulate a lot of the groups, you know, of the day. And so, you know, that's the way it was at the time, standing on the corners and 11, 12 o'clock at night until somebody said, boy, get off the corner, we got to go to work, you know. And so, yeah, we would be there until the wee hours of the morning almost. So, but it was fun, you know, listening at those groups and trying to emulate them.
By 1959, the group, they had met Johnny Mae Matthews, who was a manager, producer, and record label owner. After recognizing Otis' leadership, she renamed the group Otis Williams and the Distance. And leadership had remained with Otis ever since then.
Were you kind of the godfather of the group? You were the one, because you were the founder. I mean, were you the one that cracked the whip and said...
Johnny Mae Matthews put that joke on my back a long time ago. It wasn't anything that I said, hey, I'm going to be the leader. It was a thing when she would call a meeting, I would always be there like 5 minutes or so earlier. And so she, I guess, recognized that quality. And she said, hey, I like that. You should be the...
The group would join with Matthews' label, Northern Records, and they would release their debut song titled Come On. This was an also well-known local hit, and one day while performing at the St. Stephen's Community Center, Otis had saw Gordy and the Miracles enter. And after their performance, Otis, he would approach Gordy in the restroom, where Gordy had informed him that he liked this group, and that if he was unhappy where he was, he could come see him.
I met Barry at St. Stephen's Community Center. Now, my group at the time was Otis Williams and the Distance, which we had a regional hit, and we were very, very popular. And so we were doing this here record hop at St. Stephen's Community Center, and at the time, the Miracles were really coming into their own, and they had their first million-seller shop around. So as we were on the stage performing, you can see who's ever coming in or going out of St. Stephen's Community Center, because the stage sat real high. And we were doing our number, and they wouldn't let us off. They kept calling us back. So finally we came off, and the Miracles went on, and history was made in the men's room. So as I was in the men's room, and Barry, you know, came in. He said, "I love your group. You guys are very popular. Bleed out a this and that. If you should ever become unhappy where you are, come see me, because I'm starting my own company." So.
Things between Otis and Matthews had continued to deteriorate as she began spending money from the group's earnings on other things, prompting Otis to accept Gordy's offer. Al and Street would leave the group, and Street, he would sever ties with the group and form his own with Richard Street in the Distance. Now in need of a group, Otis, he would receive a phone call from a friendly rival named Eddie Kendricks, in which Otis informed him that he was in need of a vocalist like Kendricks. But Eddie, he would only consent when he informed Otis that his best friend Paul has to join as well.
So one day I'm at home, and Eddie called. And he called me. He said, "Hey, man, what you doing?" I said, "Who is this?" He said, "It's Eddie, man. I'm back in town." I said, "Man, you just what I need. I need a tenor." Because I said, we have a possible contract deal with Motown Records, and at that time, Richard Street had dropped out, James Pee Wee, he had dropped out, so it was just three of us. It was Elbridge Bryant, Melvin, and myself. And he said, "Well, fine. You know, hey, I like the way you guys sounded when you were when we used to rehearse together." And then he said, "Well, can I bring Paul? Can Paul join?" I said, "Man, bad as Paul is, please bring him."
Otis accepted, and after that moment, they will go under the name the Legends, and they will audition for Barry Gordy in March of 1961 with a returning Al Bryant. They blew Gordy away, and he wanted to sign them immediately. But there was one problem: their name. Because another group was already using the name, and because Gordy didn't like it, Miracle Records employee Billy Mitchell, songwriter Mickey Stevenson, Otis, and Paul Williams had came up with the name The Temptations. The odd thing is that Gordy was signed to Downbeats in 1965, and he would rename the group The Legends. The Temptations' initial lineup will record several hits, including Oh Mother Am I,
Oh, mother of mine.
Check Yourself,
Oh, that's what they told me.
You're My Dream Come True,
I don't care where you can.
and I Want a Love I Can See, among many others.
I want a love I can see. That's the only kind that moves.
By 1964, the world has been introduced to the Classic 5 era, which they will release many historical records, including The Way You Do the Things You Do,
Got a smile so bright. You know you could.
The Girl's Alright With Me,
Girls all right with me. You know
My Girl,
what can make me feel this way. My
Get Ready,
and I'm praying that your love is true, so get ready.
and Ain't Too Proud to Beg, among many, many more hits.
Ain't too proud to beg, and you know it. Please don't.
Following the departure of David Ruffin, the group that will go on to create several top charting singles with Dennis Edwards, including Cloud 9,
I'm doing fine, dear, on cloud nine.
Psychedelic Shack, and Just My Imaginations, among many more.
It was just my imagination.
The Temptations, they seen many notable faces that appeared in that group, including David Ruffin, Dennis Edwards, Richard Street, Ali Wilson, Theo Peoples, Ray Davis, and G.C. Cameron, among many others. The group's lineup was so demanding and difficult that Williams and Franklin, they had made a commitment to each other that they would never leave the group. 1994, Franklin, he would depart from the group due to his poor health, and he would sadly pass away on February 23rd, 1995, leaving Otis as the last surviving original member. Now Otis, he would write an autobiography titled The Temptations in 1988, which eventually was adapted into a miniseries in 1998. Now, although Otis is the longest member of The Temptations, he rarely sung lead, but he did take lead on a couple of songs, such as This Guy in Love With You,
Who looks at you the way I do.
For Your Love,
For your love.
Williams, he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1989, and he received an honorary doctorate from Spelman College in 2006. Now it's time to get personal a little bit. In 1961, Williams, he would marry Josephine Rogers, and the pair, they were divorced in 1964, leaving one son behind. Now Otis, he would have one son named Otis Lamont Miles. Otis' only son would sadly pass away in an accident as a construction worker in Detroit in 1985. Now, as most of you are aware, Otis was previously engaged to the famous singer Patti LaBelle, but the couple would end their engagement after Williams demanded that Patti would stop performing and become a housewife. Otis had once dated Florence Ballard as well. Williams, he was married to Ann Kane, from 1967 to 1973, and in 1983, Williams he would marry Arleta Carter. Otis is the stepfather of Temptations' current drummer, Deron Derrick, and Playboy model, Elan Carter. Despite the fact that Otis appeared to be very strict, without it, the Temptations would never be successful as we know them as today. As many has already said before, Otis' durability outraised the talent that came and went during the group's history. To this day, the Temptations are still actively touring and performing many of their great singles.